slowly starting to slow down. So I'm just gonna kick it off. Good morning, my name is Haifa. I am a marketing assistant here at InfoTrack. Welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be recapping on recent changes to the conveyancing quality scheme, what's likely to come next, and also how to ensure CQS compliance and the technology available to support that journey through integration with LEAP and InfoTrack. Taking you through today's webinar, we have Tracy Thompson, who is the lead CQS assessor. And then we also have our Northern Sales Manager, Lisa Edwards. A bit of housekeeping before I pass over to Tracy. We do have a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions for Tracy or Lisa, please do submit them into the Q&A tab as opposed to the chat box, as we'll be able to follow up if we run out of time or anything like that. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, so you can recap this webinar later, and we'll share the recording link after the webinar. Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Tracy now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tracy Thompson. I am a lawyer and was appointed as lead assessor for CQS back in 2019. My background is property law, so obviously natural fit with dealing with all things CQS. And some of you may have come across me previously. I am quite vocal in terms of having conversations about CQS and what practices need to be doing to make sure that they can demonstrate compliance when you are requested to do so. So I am just going to be talking you through for the next half an hour or so in relation to all things CQS, what changes we've had, how you can demonstrate compliance, and also what you should be looking out for this year. Okay, so CQS, we had some significant changes made in May 2022. So about this time last year, the Law Society made an announcement to state that there was going to be a new updated core practice management standard that would be dealing with the new emerging core risks which conveyancing practices were being exposed to, and also that there would be the launch of the formal on-site assessments taking place from the 1st of May. So the Law Society did announce, like I say, about this time last year, that practices needed to make sure that they were assessment ready from the 1st of May, and that you needed to be following the new core practice management standards in practice from the 1st of May. So that's where we're at currently. The core practice management standard updates, which took place compulsory from May 2022, just to give you a bit of an update on kind of what that looks like. We had the revisions to the core practice management standard back in May 2019. And at that point, we also had the updates to the conveyancing protocols, which was in August 2019. And of course, then we had the on-site assessment pilots, which took place later on in the year in November 2019. So the revisions from the 2019 version of the core practice management standard to what you should be following in practice now in May 2022 version, we had some fairly significant formatting changes. So the standard previously didn't really mirror Excel, whereas now it does. So we have the same numberings that apply throughout. So that for Excel accredited practices, or for practices who are looking to achieve Excel, it's easier for you to be able to make the connection between the two standards, because there is about 50% overlap between the core practice management standards for CQS and also the requirements of Excel. So there should be some alignment there. And now the formatting actually allows practices to be able to easily cross-reference between the two. And as part of that reformatting, everything was moved around in the new core practice management standard, but we also had the addition of one new chapter as well. So 2019 version was 6 chapters. We now have the 22 version, which is 7 chapters. So we had the development of or the inclusion of people management section, which didn't appear previously. So now those 7 sections do mirror Excel. We also had the individual core practice management standard requirements being increased from 34 through to 40. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there were an additional 6 requirements, just some of those requirements have been split out as well. So, so what we're left with now, 7 chapters and 40 individual requirements, some of which are fairly straightforward, others are more complex, you know, for example, where you'd expect fraud, property and mortgage fraud, anti-money laundering, and those kind of requirements are more in depth and have more requirements to be able to satisfy. So we had updates to all the sections apart from section 1, which is structure and strategy, and section 2, which is financial management, and they were just about reformatting and number changes and movement around. So one of the things that I will point out to you, specifically in relation to the difference between the core practice management standard from 19 through to 22, is that you will see in certain circumstances that there has been a stripping out of requirements. So say, for example, in the old standard, we had 6.1 and 6.2, which was data protection and information management and security. And if any of you kind of were familiar with the 2019 version, there was quite a lot of subsections in both of those particular requirements for data protection and information management and security. So information management and security, for example, you know, set out all the requirements in relation to, you know, how you deal with user accounts, you know, all the techie stuff in relation to firewalls, and so lots of subsections. Now you will see that the 22 core practice management standard, which is now at 3.2 for information management and security, is there's a lot less narrative. However, what you will see in certain parts of the standard is that there are quite significant guidance notes, and some of those specific requirements have actually just moved into the guidance notes. So those guidance notes are intended to set out the minimum expectations for practices. So do make sure that you're not just looking at, you know, 3.1 or 3.2 of the core practice management standard and thinking that, you know, those are, you know, the minimum expectations of what we need to meet. Always look in the guidance notes as well, because actually that's where you'll find the detail of what we expect to see in terms of your documentation and what's actually being followed in practice. So just a little tip for you there. So just to identify what those changes were, if you haven't done a cross-check between the old standard and the new, which is what you should be following in practice. Information management security, which is section 3, we had the changes which I just mentioned to you. So as I say, you know, in the previous standard, this was quite complex. There were, you know, A, B, C through to, I think, H. Whereas now we have minimal requirements, but actually it's set out in the guidance notes what you should actually be doing. So the changes that we have here, other than the movement in the standard, is ensuring that personnel are kept aware of developments in cybercrime and how they affect the practice. Obviously, practices, you know, as legal practices, holding a lot of client data, a lot of client money, are susceptible to cybercrime attacks, which we all know, we all read about. You know, a statistic that I read recently was that, you know, 75% of all crime, you know, that's all crime, not just crime in relation to the legal sector. 75% of all crime is cyber related. So, you know, it's a real area of success for the criminals. And obviously you need to make sure that everybody in the practice is aware of, you know, what cybercrime looks like in your practice and how they can help, you know, contribute to mitigating those risks. So that's a new requirement. So we do expect to see that being carried out in practice under the changes. We then have a new requirement in section 3.3. Just to reiterate as well, I'm only actually taking you through the specific sections of the standard where there are changes, because otherwise to go through the whole, you know, 40 core practice management standard requirements, if any of you heard me before, takes me at least 3.5 hours. So I'm just pointing out to you what the changes are. You know, in terms of the colour coding, if we have green, then we've got, you know, the same requirement. If we've got amber, then there's a slight variation. If we have red, then it is completely new and didn't exist in the previous standard. So this is one of the new requirements. So we have this obligation for practices to have a register of all the plans, policies and procedures that are set out in the core practice management standard. So basically everything that exists in the CPMS, we expect to see a register that details, you know, what the plan, policy or procedure is, who's responsible for it, and then you need to have a documented procedure setting out when those plans, policies and procedures will be reviewed, how they'll be reviewed, who will be involved in that review, and also what will be taken into account in the review. So bear in mind, you've not heard of me before, and you've not listened to me speak about CQS. I talk about, always come back to the wording in the standard. So if the standard says the word procedure, then that procedure needs to be written down. So it's in the scheme rules that a procedure is effectively a written set of steps that a practice will take to achieve an outcome. So where we say, there must be a procedure, then we would look to see a corresponding document that sets out that, for example, on an annual basis, the SRO and head of conveyancing will review each plan, policy and procedure contained within the core practice management standard. And as part of that review, they will take into account such things as patterns and trends in the practice, data extracted from within the practice, changes to legislation, changes in regulation, changes to quality management standards, that kind of thing. So that clearly sets out that to undertake this review, this is what it looks like. This is how we do it. This is who's involved. This is when it happens, and this is what we'll be looking at. And that is what a procedure is. So to document, we will carry out a review of each plan, policy and procedure. That's not acceptable. So just give consideration to the wording of the standard. So that's a new requirement. Moving on to people management, which is a totally new section, although some of the requirements did appear in the old standard. So we've got people management now, which mirrors section 4 of Lexel. We have the requirements to have a learning and development policy, which we need to make sure that we give consideration to appropriate training being provided to personnel. So again, think about the wording, what is appropriate training? So appropriate training may be different for different roles. So give consideration to what is appropriate and who is it we're training. Set all that out in your policy. And we need to give consideration for ensuring that supervisors and managers receive appropriate training as well. So again, different roles, different requirements, what training, what does training look like for each of those different categories. And then we have the requirement to have a procedure to evaluate training. So again, this needs to be documented to evaluate training. We will do X, Y, and Z. So bear in mind that the spirit of evaluating training is about what we learned, how are we going to put this in practice? What are we going to change? We've all sat there in training courses and thought, crikey, that's my Smith file. From now on, I'm going to do something differently. That's what it's about. We have evaluation of training that, quite often includes, the quality of the speaker and the quality of the notes and the quality of the venue and, all that kind of thing, which is great. And that's good feedback for the practice. But actually, in terms of, what we're really looking at is what am I going to change? What am I going to do differently? And we should evaluate that and document it. We need to make sure that we continue to have learning and development plans for relevant persons, that we are updating personnel in relation to the core practice management standard and protocols, so they should be aware of what they look like and how the practice complies, and then of course make sure that you continue to do your CQS mandatory training as required. We then have the second completely new requirement, which is Induction. So this is, again, kind of slightly mirrors Excel, but we didn't have this at all in the 2019 version of the standard. So you need to make sure that you have a documented induction. So that means that, you need to be able to evidence that an induction has been carried out and what that induction looks like and what it includes, but make sure that it does include identifying immediate training requirements, and also make sure it includes tying into the training requirements, identifying, key policies that member of staff needs to be aware of to be able to carry out their job efficiently, and they can manage the risks of working in the residential conveyancing department. And be mindful of, again, the wording. So this is not just an induction for new starters to the practice, it is including those transferring roles within the practice. So say, for example, you've got a trainee, and your trainee has done a seat in prime, they've done a seat in family, and then they're coming into conveyancing to do their final seat. Then their exposure to risk is going to be very different, their training needs are going to be very different, and the policies that are going to be, used on a regular basis in the work that they do. So dealing with lenders, leasehold policy, SDLT, property and mortgage fraud, all those kind of things, they might not necessarily have had the same exposure in a different department. So make sure that you do carry out an induction for people transferring roles within the practice. Then we moved on to section 5, which is risk management. So this is the chunkiest section of the core practice management standard. Not a huge amount of changes in relation to section 5, but what we do have is where we've got supervision procedures that did exist in the previous version. We also now have the addition of ensuring that personnel adhere to the conveyancing protocols. So previously, we've got the requirement in learning and development to ensure that, that staff are aware of the protocols, and now we need to make sure that, personnel adhere, and we need procedures to make sure that that happens. So, you need to give consideration to documenting that in your supervision policy, in the supervision procedures. Good way of being able to monitor adherence to the protocols, obviously, is independent file reviews. So that's a good way of being able to kind of cross-reference when you're doing your file reviews to whether the protocols are being adhered to, and if not, then obviously that gives you the opportunity to identify a training need and obviously feed that back into to updated policies and procedures and remedial action. So that's something you need to be aware of. 5.12, so this is only a snapshot of 5.12, which is the anti-money laundering policy requirements. So the remainder of 5.12, which is quite complex in terms of the information needed, is still the same. However, we have got some slight amendments here where we've got the procedure for checking and analysing the source of funds and source of wealth, and keeping on file both the evidence obtained and the documented analysis. Okay, so quite simply, firstly, make sure that everybody is aware of the difference between source of funds and source of wealth. So source of funds is, obtaining evidence of source of funds is getting evidence that the money exists and where it exists. So that is your HSBC bank statement that shows there's £80,000 in there. Source of wealth is, okay, so how has that money been accumulated? And when we start making investigations in relation to source of wealth, that's where we need to look a little bit at, the client. This is where know your client comes into play, and, the whole of the information that you've been provided and that you've been obtaining from the clients right the way through the transaction. So what we need to do here is to make sure that there is an analysis of the evidence of source of funds and analysis of the evidence of source of wealth, and that needs to be documented on the file. So, for example, I quite often look at files and I will see bank statements, and I see bank statements that have, just client name, account number, £100,000 sat in that account, and nothing else at all. So no explanation, no documented analysis, nothing really to show me that there's anything other than the fact that there's £100,000 sat in that account. And it might be that your fee earner has had a conversation with the client, and and they have made investigations, and and that kind of thing, but there does need to be this documented analysis. So always work on the basis that if the SRA came in, or if the National Crime Agency came in, or local constabulary, or whoever's involved in this process, and they come along and they want a file, and they issue a file disclosure order, or file production order, and all they're going to see is a bank statement, you would need to say to them, well, actually, this is what I'd have done, this is what I decided, this is what I investigated, and this was the outcome, this is what this was what I concluded. So work on the basis that if you don't have that opportunity to be able to say those things to them, then the file should speak for itself. And that is exactly what a documented analysis should do. It should set out the thought process as to what the fee earner was thinking in relation to the evidence that they've obtained, and there should be some kind of summary or conclusion that sets out their position. And not only from a fee earner's perspective, that's good practice. The file should always tell the story. But you might not necessarily remember the conversation that you had 3 years down the line. You might not necessarily remember the conversation that you had 10 days ago with the client. So that's a really important aspect of making sure that you document what's going on. And also from a business owner's perspective, it's really important as well, because it might be that you're the only person that is left in the practice to have a conversation with the SRA or the NCA or Sussex Police, for example. So you need that information on the file. And I always kind of use an analogy like when we're taught as kids, they say if you're doing an exam, always show your workings out. So even if you get the answer wrong, at least somebody can see what your thought process was. So that is really key. And of course, you can then tie that in to the new requirements that always existed in the legislation but didn't exist in CQS until now, and that is making sure that you've got an AML matter risk assessment on every file. So obviously we've got the requirement for practice-wide risk assessment, which appears earlier in 5.12, but now we have the specific requirement to make sure that you have the AML matter risk assessment. Like I say, you might have always had it because it is a legislative requirement, but now as belt and braces, it does appear in CQS. So these two things can marry up. So it might be the risk assessment is something, a document that you're updating as you go through. It's supposed to be a working document. Your fee earner needs to engage with the process. And whoever is looking at that file needs to see that there is engagement with the process. So this is the perfect opportunity where you're dealing with all things anti-money laundering, ID, CDD, know your client, PEP status, electronic ID verification, source of funds, source of wealth, etc. This is where you could have that summary and that conclusion where the fee earner is actually setting out that this is the decision I made. So those are really important, and especially important given the SRA AML thematic reviews, which are being carried out at the moment. 5.13, so this is property and mortgage fraud. Again, some slight changes. We need to make sure that there's a practice level risk assessment that identifies red flags in relation to property and mortgage fraud. So that needs to be considered and documented. And then we need to make sure that we have a documented fraud risk assessment on each file, as well as your anti-money laundering risk assessment. So again, try to keep these separate if at all possible, so that there is a clear consideration for what is property and mortgage fraud and what is anti-money laundering risk, so that a sensible conversation can be had by the fee earner when the SRA do visit and do the AML thematic review. We need to make sure that when we have identified a risk of fraud, that the transaction is then supervised appropriately. How does that happen? Document it. We need to make sure that we apply enhanced due diligence when we've got a high risk of fraud. And we also need to make sure that we are giving consideration of a risk of a fraudulent other party. So we're acting for the buyer. We consider that the red flags apply to the seller because it's high value property that we're buying, it's unencumbered, the seller lives abroad, the property is empty, etc. All of those kind of green bar red flags. So acting with the buyer, what happens now? How does this file continue? What are the supervision arrangements? What steps will be taken to make sure that that risk is managed in practice? So those are the changes to 513, which you need to be aware of and following in practice. Then we have 515, so this is SDLT, so some slight amendments. You all obviously have your own policies, you all have your own procedures that you follow. You need to make sure that you are cross-referencing all of what you do in practice against these requirements, not only for SDLT, but obviously for all of the core practice management standard. You need to make sure that when you are giving your questionnaire to the client and you're asking them to complete it, that when you're talking about, are you a first-time buyer, you actually set out the definition of what is a first-time buyer. You set out the definition of what is a major interest in a dwelling, so that they can make an informed choice. And then we need to make sure that we have, a clear written SDLT calculation provided to the client at the outset as well. So those are the changes to the SDLT policy requirements. Then we have acting in leasehold property, again, some slight amendments and expansion in relation to the overarching requirements that we need to make sure that we are including a procedure for giving full, clear and accessible written advice to the client on the lease. So the spirit of intention for that is that you're not just sending that 47-page lease to say, please read the covenants which you need to comply with on page 22, Schedule 4, and ensure that you follow them. That's not full, clear and accessible written advice. You need to be setting out what those covenants are to the client in easily accessible language so that they understand it. SRA put out some guidance on this. I can't remember now whether it was last year or 18 months ago, basically saying that, the previous scenario where I mentioned, here's your lease, read the covenants, understand and follow, is not acceptable practice. So you do need to make sure that you spell it out to the client. You need to set out to them the difference between a freehold and leasehold property. So that's new. And then you need to make sure that obviously you are setting out any key information that is appropriate to that particular lease to the client, again, in clear, written, understandable language, and giving consideration to, if there's a lender, what the current lender requirements are, and making sure that you're considering those and dealing with them appropriately. So those are the changes to leasehold. And then we have client care. So client care is section 6. And what we have here is a slight amendment to the format of the requirements. So when we look back at the old standard, 6.2 had you must communicate the following in writing to clients at the outset, and there was a great big long list. I think it was A through to G or H, setting out all the things. Name of the fear and the status of the fear, name of the supervisor, status of the supervisor, service levels, time scales, all those kind of things. They still exist, okay, but they've been moved into the guidance notes. So don't think that all of a sudden we only need to confirm these two things to the client. Obviously, regulatory obligations still apply. So we just need to make sure that we are setting out to the client in writing timescales, levels of service, but then look at the guidance notes as well and see all the other information that is deemed to be a minimum expectation as to what should be contained in that correspondence to the client. And obviously your client care pack, is number of pages like everybody's is. So you just make sure that you cross-reference what it is that you're supposed to be telling the client against what you are actually telling them. And then we have changes to dealing with lenders. So this is quite a substantial change. So firstly, we need to set out that the lender is a client if we're acting with the lender and the lay client. But more significant change is that we need to ensure that we have a procedure. So documented procedure setting out how Part 2 of the UK Finance Handbook will be checked by the fee earner, and that will actually be recorded on the file that the check's been carried out. So again, you need to give consideration to your practice, how that's going to work. Are you going to use, technology is a great supporter of this particular requirement, making sure that, you set out, this is how we do it, this is when we do it, this is where we record it, this is when it's going to be recorded, by whom, etc., etc. So that's the changes in relation to dealing with lenders. Everything else remains the same. And then we have complaints handling procedures. So again, regulatory obligations. We need to ensure that we comply with the regulatory obligations, comply with the SRA transparency rules, and publish your complaints handling procedure. Slight amendment. We need to make sure that we set out how a complaint can be made and to who. Give the client a copy of the complaints procedure if it's requested, and obviously make sure it's available on the website. And then we have some slight changes to accord with the solicitors, the code of conduct for solicitors, and that is making sure that we tell the client that we, as a practice, will deal with their complaint promptly, fairly, and free of charge, and that we will identify to the client what our stance is as a practice in relation to mediation. So whether you subscribe to alternative dispute resolution, and also that they have the right to approach the legal ombudsman, and that they also have the right to refer to the SRA in certain circumstances, such as breach of code of conduct, discrimination, that kind of thing. So just some additional requirements in CQS that should be fed into your complaints handling procedure if you don't have them already. File and case management, section 7, final section of the standard, and we have the third new requirement, which is having procedures in place to minimise the risk of avoidable HMLR requisitions. So these are the silly requisitions that HMLR don't want. The Tracy with an E in one document, Tracy without an E in a different document. Signatures not witnessed, witness details not fully completed, documents not dated, those kind of things. So make sure that you've got some kind of procedure in place for making those checks prior to submitting the AP1. And again, technology is a great advantage there. And then make sure the clients are aware that they can register up to 3 service addresses as well, including an email address. So again, that's something that is new, that you might not be doing in practice yet. But make sure that you give consideration to that. And then finally, the end of the matter, closing procedures. We send all that information out to the client, which remains unchanged, but then we need to make sure that we have set procedures for archiving, destroying files in accordance with your data protection retention schedule that you will consider as part of your data protection overhaul and review that you would have done back in 2018 and hopefully have reviewed since. So those are the changes to the core practice management standard. So if you haven't cross-referenced what you've had in place, if you've not looked at the standard since the changes in May 2022, those are the areas that you should be specifically focusing on. Just in relation to the on-site assessments, just to let you know that they did commence in May 2022. They are happening. They are happening in kind of fairly small numbers at the moment, but as the Law Society refine the process and extract more data and make some changes, which I'll tell you about shortly, those numbers will be increased over time. There are varying profiles of practices that are being assessed, so there isn't any particular kind of type of practice or any particular location or anything like that. The Law Society make the selections as to who is being assessed and when that assessment will take place, and it's the data that they hold that will identify which practices that they're going to go out and actually conduct the on-site assessment for. So there is a pretty clear emergence of patterns and trends that are being exposed from the assessments. I do a lot of CQS work in terms of consultancy, do kind of mock assessments and CQS reviews for practices so that they can check where they're at in terms of their compliance, and I see the same patterns and trends coming out of the majority of practices that I deal with. Just to give you a bit of information about that, really, which I will do in the next slide, so that you can kind of give some focus to those key areas. One thing that I want you to take away from today, if you've heard from me before, you will, you'll recognise the slide, and you'll recognise the 3-tier process that I talk about. If you haven't, really just take this away from today. If you take nothing else, And that is, so this 3-tier process that I talked about now for a good 3.5 years. Say as you do as you say, and provide the evidence. That's really, really important. So demonstrating compliance is not saying, well, we would have done that. Demonstrating compliance is not handing over an all singing, all dancing policy that ticks every box for everything that could ever possibly be needed to be included in that policy. Demonstrating compliance is having, just documenting the journey and actually being able to evidence that you are actually following what you say you do in practice. So effectively, the say as you do is all your documented policies and procedures. So you cross-reference the requirements of the core practice management standard. So this is what should be in your policy as an absolute minimum. You document your policy and you set out that this is what we do. We will carry out A, B, and C to comply with the legislation, the regulation, the core practice management standard, to manage the risk. We do A, B, and C. Then in practice, you make sure that actually that is what happens. Everybody is following A, B, and C, so that you then have an alignment between you say as you do and you do as you say. Otherwise, if you don't, so if you say you do A, B, and C, and actually in practice we do A, B, and D, then you're going to have a misalignment. So actually what you'll find is that you're in breach of your own policy. So that's where you would end up being assigned a non-compliance, because you're not actually doing what it is that you say you do. So those two things are really, really important. Say as you do as you say, make sure that, that they do align. And then equally as important is provide the evidence. So make sure that actually there is some evidence that demonstrates that what you've actually said that you do is actually happening in practice. So whether it's having, a learning and development plan that sets out this is what we will do, and then your training records and your evaluation, demonstrates that the training has been done. And then obviously further evidence would be, a conversation when we do the on-site assessments, to have a conversation with the owner to say, talk to me about what training you've done and what did that look like, and what did you learn from it, and that kind of thing. So these things all then marry up, and that's from an auditor, an audit process is documentation, make sure you're following it, and make sure that there is evidence. And quite often I come across practices where they'll say we do something, so they'll document it, they'll talk about it, but then actually when we pick up the file, there is no evidence that that actually happened. And evidence is key, from an auditor, my own words, if there's no evidence, it didn't happen, and that would be the same thing for the SRA, for the NCA, whoever's looking at that file on a Saturday afternoon where you don't have the opportunity to say to them, but this is what we would have done, this is how we would have done it, then there's no evidence. So you're on the back foot from the outset. So that's really important. Just to identify some common areas of non-compliance, I'm just keeping my eye on the time because I know Lisa will want to have a chat with you. Common areas that I'm seeing, patterns and trends that we're seeing from CQS firms: business continuity plan testing, lack of documentation, setting out, our testing procedure is, how we do it, when we do it, who's involved, what that looks like, and then actually evidence that procedure, if it is documented, evidence of testing. So that is a key area where practices are falling short. And COVID was now nearly 3 years ago, so we can no longer rely on the fact that in March 2020 everybody had to go work at home, and that was our biggest test of business continuity, which of course it was, we all know that. But business continuity is something that needs to be considered on an ongoing basis, because we've been there, we've done that now, we know how to respond to it, and and things have moved on. Think more things like what you do if you walk in the office and there is a fax that says you've been subject to a ransomware attack, do not turn on your PCs. I have no idea whatsoever what terminology or what wording a criminal would use. But I imagine it would be something along those lines. Sit down, have a conversation, scenario test. What would we do? Get people involved. What would work? How could we continue to run the business? Financial verification procedures. So make sure that you are setting out how you verify bank details, for example. Also give consideration to when you are potentially dealing with money coming in from or going out to a high-risk third country, what additional steps are taken. any additional provisions, give consideration to that. Might be that practice-wide risk assessment says that we do not act for anybody that lives abroad, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as we do not receive money from abroad, So think about that one. Anti-money laundering, practice-wide risk assessments. That's something that that firms I particularly see fall short in terms of what they should have in that practice-wide risk assessment. The SRA put out their AML thematic report review. I think it was in October for the previous 12 months. That's a really good read to identify that they are seeing very similar things. Practice-wide risk assessments not up to scratch, matter risk assessments are not completed, not on the file, no engagement with process, just a tick in a box saying, AML completed, that's it. That is not what the SRA wants to see. Source of funds, source of wealth, evidence, and that documented analysis, and also lack of the AML audit and lack of appointment of a money laundering compliance officer. So those are key areas. The AML audit in particular, have a read of that report. The SRA, I think, visited X amount of practices, of which about 50% of them didn't have an audit, of which 50% they considered were of size nature, where they needed to have an independent audit function in place. So, unless you are a sole practitioner working on your own, then you really do need to look at this AML audit function being carried out in practice. Property and mortgage fraud, no matter risk assessment, no consideration of having a matter risk assessment, checking the ID of the other side's conveyancer, kind of just either not thinking about it, not recording the evidence, that kind of thing. Conflict policy, I see a lot of conflict policy that just talk about conflicts generally. They don't identify whether we act on, both sides of a matter on occasion. We act for the seller and the buyer. If so, who authorises that? What does it look like? What steps are we going to take to make sure that we can mitigate the potential risk of a conflict occurring? And then what happens if it does? That kind of thing. That's all missing from policies. SDLT procedures, lack of LTT considerations. So 4 practices I've come across in the last 12 months whereby they haven't had the foresight to think about the fact that the property was in Wales and therefore there's a different calculation, and at that time there wasn't first-time buyer relief for LTT, and they found themselves in hot water because all of their calculations right the way through has been in relation to SDLT, first-time buyer relief claimed that didn't exist because it was a Welsh property. So do give consideration to making sure that people are aware that LTT does exist, particularly obviously if you deal with properties in Wales or you're in that kind of geographical location on the west side of the country. Second pair of eyes on the calculation. So again, make sure that that's happening and that there is evidence of that second pair of eyes verifying the calculation. And then this cross-checking of the consideration in the transfer, the SDLT return, the contract against the payments made from client account is intended to be a post-payment, post-completion procedure. So give consideration to how that can happen in practice. Ideal to tie that in with obviously the pre-AP1 preparation. Leasehold procedures, see a lot of documentation that is silent on the point of what's a freehold and what's leasehold. And again, even only in the last week have I read a report to a client that says, here's your lease, ensure that you comply with the covenants set out in it. And that's not acceptable. Reporting to lenders, those Part 2 checks, if you've not picked up on this from the revised Poor Practice Management Standard, make sure that that you are thinking about how you're going to review Part 2, how you're going to record on the file that it's been reviewed, how that's all going to be evidenced, and then detailing the reporting requirements to the lender, rather than just having a policy that says, we'll give consideration to if a report needs to be made to the lender and the fee earner will make that ultimate decision. We need to then set out, in these circumstances, we need to check if there is, a specific reporting form. This is what we need to tell the lender. This is what legal advice we give them, etc., etc. Just cross-reference with the requirements of the Poor Practice Management Standard. HMLR Property Alert Service is a requirement in 7.4. So make sure that your closing letter to the client with the title information document says, we would draw your attention to HMLR Property Alert Service so that you can obviously put them on notice that they can register up to 10 addresses to help protect them from fraud. So we see very little documentation setting out that on closing the file we will write to the client and tell them, and then obviously closing letters that I review on a very regular basis quite often would fail to have that information in it. And finally, another pattern and trend is obviously the new requirements for avoiding HMLR requisitions. A lot of practices have not yet got round to setting into place a procedure for making sure that you can reduce those risks of requisitions and documented it, and obviously making sure that it's happening in practice. So those are common areas of non-compliance, and I would say I'm looking at putting together some formal stats at the moment, but we're probably looking at 90 to 95% of practices. These are the patterns and trends that I'm identifying. So what's new for CQS in 2023? So there is, I'm not aware of any changes to the core practice management standard, but what we do have changes in relation to, and this is going to affect every single practice, and is something you really do need to take note of, is that the application process is going to be changing. So this change is imminent. Law Society will be publishing some information imminently, but there is a new online portal that will replace the paper-based application system. So this online portal will be kind of all singing, all dancing. It will be new application questions. We have previously different questions depending on where you were in your CQS cycle, in terms of whether it was a renewal or whether it was a re-accreditation application. That will be dispensed of. So it will be new questions, but it will be the same application regardless of where you are in that cycle. The application through the portal must be completed and submitted by your CQS expiry date. So at the moment, you'll probably get an email, or the SRO will get an email 3 months before to say your CQS accreditation expires on this date, make sure you get the application in. That will continue, there will be a countdown, but you need to make sure by that D date, that expiry date, you have submitted your online application through this portal. Otherwise, your CQS accreditation will automatically lapse. And obviously that's going to bring about some significant problems for practices. There will be the ability to request a one-off 1 month extension. So that will be a once only opportunity for a 1 month extension. The Law Society will be making an administration charge in that regard. I think it's about £110, £115 there or thereabouts. And again, if you are granted that extension, then you need to make sure that submission has been made by the time the expiry comes up to date. So the way this portal will work is it will be smart, it will be intelligent, and there will be sections that you will be able to work through. You can come out of it, you can save it, you can go back in, you can move around the application. But you will need to answer questions and you will need to upload corresponding documentation. And only when you have answered the question and or uploaded the documentation will you get a tick in each section. And only when you have all the ticks in all the boxes in all the sections will the submit button become live for you to be able to click that button to submit the application. So no longer will you be able to submit an application and say, this is to follow, that's to follow. So you really do need to make sure that you start working on this. Once the portal has been launched, you need to work on it quickly and in good time. Otherwise, you're potentially going to have some difficulties. So the portal will be beneficial to the Law Society, obviously, because what it will allow them to do is to be able to extract data from the information, so it will be intelligent, so they will then be able to identify a practice's risk profile and identify maybe potential hotspots where a practice might benefit from more interaction or an on-site assessment. So the information that will be contained within this portal will be analysed and will be fed through, and that is likely to potentially identify to the Law Society which practices are then going to need the on-site assessment perhaps earlier than others. So that is something to watch out for. So make sure your SRO keeps an eye out for Emails from the Law Society, they don't spam. They're either telling you something useful or telling you that you've been selected for an on-site assessment. So do keep an eye out for those. Hopefully, I talked too long as usual. That's giving you a little bit of information about what it is that you should be focusing on and what's coming next. So I will now finish and hand you over to Lisa, who will talk to you about how they can support the process.
Thanks, Tracy. Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Edwards from InfoTrack, and what I'm going to talk to you about over the next 10 to 15 minutes is just how by using InfoTrack helps you as an individual and as a firm, firm-wide, to meet CQS compliance requirements. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen for a second and quickly show you a couple of slides just to highlight how we work closely with CQS. So hopefully you can see some slides on my screen, which would help greatly. There we go. It's there. So first of all, for those of you who use InfoTrack already through LEAP, this is just to highlight to you guys what is available on the system at your fingertips. For those of you who are new to LEAP and haven't yet engaged with us about how InfoTrack works within LEAP, hopefully this session will help. And for those users who are absolutely brand new and not with LEAP or thinking about getting LEAP or thinking about getting InfoTrack, hopefully this will help as well. But basically, over the last, 5 years or so, we've been working very closely with the Law Society and other governing bodies as well, just to check in what the requirements are for conveyancers, and in particular concentrating on CQS. And when InfoTrack was born, we didn't realise, but organically we were helping law firms meet the requirements needed for CQS audits. And as Tracy has already mentioned, the changes in the CPMS for 2023 and 2022 as well, I just wanted to show you a few slides about how InfoTrack as technology supports you and your firm when working with CQS. So looking at the structure, the sections that Tracy outlined where all of the changes have been made, I've logically fitted in our products and our services that you can instantly use via the InfoTrack platform. So one thing that I will be mentioning quite a lot through these sections is how InfoTrack, just by being a firm-wide account, meaning now when you have an account with InfoTrack, you can have all users within the conveyancing team using the system. So therefore, when it comes to documenting, do as you say as you do, and document evidence as well, you can be comfortable in knowing that everybody within the team is using the one same system, so the requirements will be naturally met. So by having a firm-wide account, not just you within the firm can see what you've been doing, but everybody within the firm can as well. And that carries throughout. So the documentation of evidence and providing evidence becomes a whole lot easier for teams. Now, when it comes into the section 2, financial management, which Tracy elaborated on as well, to help you manage financial tracking on LEAP, on files and so on and so forth. Again, InfoTrack logically helps in that matter, because you use an InfoTrack within LEAP, everything is then cashed through to the ledger. Disbursements are already added onto the final statement, for example. So, and one invoice as well for all the services that you use with us. So you're not juggling multiple invoices and entering them into the LEAP system. If you use InfoTrack for all services, that will automatically add on to your ledger. So no disbursements at all, and particularly as well when it comes to indemnity policies and so on, they can't be missed because you're using one system within LEAP to actually keep your finances and your statements up to date. Also, as well, section 3, information management, just having the integration helps for documenting evidence, as I've mentioned, but literally one portal for everything works very well. And also as well for reporting back to lenders and information management, the integration we have with LMS as well is tight, it's in there, it's documented. And I'll highlight a little bit about the LMS integration we have in a second when we look at the website. Also, section 4, people management, very new to the core practice management standards. It's all about how you actually support your users in your CQS procedures and making sure that they know the procedure to follow, where that documentation is, and how to use the systems to provide the evidence. When you actually use InfoTrack, we automatically assign a dedicated account manager to you, and training is fluent and free throughout your life cycle with InfoTrack. So you are very well supported by InfoTrack providing training for your existing users and also any new users that you actually employ as well. And a lot of firms work with us to build InfoTrack as part of induction programs as well. And we bespoke the trainings to match your CQS procedures, basically. So we will talk about best practice and what's expected of your member of staff when using InfoTrack to meet CQS requirements as well. So we can dovetail in that. So the support is there from us as well. And as Tracy mentioned, section 5, risk management within the CPMS, is the heaviest section, and no surprises, InfoTrack supports you a lot in meeting the criteria due to the services that we offer. And you can see there at the top of the list for section 5 is recording key dates. So key conveyancing dates, priority search, refresh, AP1 requisitions, and so on, to keep on top of those dates, to not miss any of those deadlines, and to therefore create an extra work. We keep you and your users firm-wide up to date when things do need refreshing, particularly when it comes to priorities and AP1 requisitions as well. Okay, and even if a member of staff who is on holiday receives a requisition whilst they are off, you as a firm will be notified within InfoTrack, and anybody can take over that work to do that. So recording key dates is a nice feature that we have on the system. Not going through every single one on that list, but looking at the ones that are new to the CPMS standards, or CPM standards, is the lender handbook management. If you've been using InfoTrack for quite some time, those who are on the webinar at the moment, you might not have noticed that we have the lender handbook built into the system as standard. So the whole lender handbook is there for you to check, at the beginning of the transaction, at the end of the transaction, and throughout. And the good thing about the lender handbook on InfoTrack as well is that you can set up alerts. So for the particular banks or the lenders that you are actually working with, you can literally set an alert where you will receive an email when anything changes within that, within their requirements, and that will notify you of the full changes automatically as well. And all of those changes will drop straight back into LEAP too as well. So that will be automated through case management. Also on there as well, SDLT, just to pick that up, on SDLT, for those people who use us already, you know that it's very quick to compile and submit an SDLT through us. But it's also a good way to use the secondary calculator that you have to actually prove evidence that you've actually used within CQS as well, because you can actually work out the calculation through us of the SDLT payment. That automatically acts as a secondary way of working, and also documents all the evidence for you as well. So I'll show you that in a little bit more detail later, because a lot of people who use InfoTrack at the moment don't realise that the evidence is provided straight away and is historical as well, so it will stay with the case forever. Also, one thing that I want to talk about is in client care, the property report. For those people who are not using it at the moment, but the property report is available for everybody to use. It's where we can actually produce your report on title. For a typical freehold, takes less than 15 minutes really. But because you're using InfoTrack for searches, for land registry documentation and so on, digital data, it means that we can actually compile a full property report for you for searches, for report on title, everything else that goes with it. And the reason why I mentioned property report is due to the CPMS change of providing information every time on leasehold properties. If you do a leasehold property report through InfoTrack, we will make sure that all of the information that you have to relay to a client to meet the standards is automatically entered in. Okay, and I'll show you quickly how that works later. And then filing case management. Of course, everybody probably on this system is either using LEAP already. InfoTrack integrates fully into LEAP. So everything that you do within LEAP and order from InfoTrack throughout will drop organically into your case direct. And what I'll talk about in a second is how to access that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just flip over to my internet to show you how InfoTrack works within LEAPs and just show you a few features that are on there. And hopefully you can actually see my LEAP matters here. Okay, I'm using LEAP 365 for this demonstration, by the way, everyone. So if it looks slightly different to your desktop version, it's because I've accessed LEAP through the internet. So for those people who are new to LEAP and haven't yet discovered InfoTrack, or for those people who do use InfoTrack already, just a quick recap. When you have your LEAP matter, you just simply open up your LEAP matter. It will display any documentation regarding your matter here. And of course, every single thing that you order from InfoTrack will drop directly straight into LEAP. And remember what I mentioned earlier, that will also appear on the ledger, on any final statements as well, all of those costings. But all the documents, your searches, for example, will rest within LEAP, your land registry documentations, HMRC, your SDLT submissions, and of course your AP1. But just bear in mind that every single thing that you use on InfoTrack is documented within the matter. So again, going back to providing evidence, knowing that firm-wide you use InfoTrack through LEAP and every user is using InfoTrack, when it comes to showing the evidence of on any CQS assessment, this is where everybody will go to show the evidence is documented. So to launch InfoTrack from LEAP on 365, we are looking at searching and services. And when you actually go into InfoTrack from LEAP, of course, what you are seeing is the front screen. Just bear with it while it loads. It never works quickly when you want it to, but there we go. Okay, so what you are seeing on the existing orders is all of the documents you've already ordered within LEAP. And of course, that's what we've just seen in the matter. But just to refresh people's memory of what we're seeing over here. So left-hand side, we have a navigation bar, which shows a number of dashboards. And over to the right, we have the calendar, okay? Now, these two bars over to the right and to the left are firm-wide. So what we have in the middle is relating to the matter only, but what we are looking at over to the right-hand side is across LEAP as a whole. So you can see here that my calendar, my key dates, so remember what I mentioned about managing key dates within conveyancing, your calendar works a treat here. So I'm looking at all of my reminders, basically, of what I've got to do, what's going to expire, my AP1 requisition status, and so on. Everything is logged here. So, for example, I've got a notice priority expiry that's happening tomorrow. My colleague Scott Bazzinis is actually on holiday, so as a member of the firm, I can quickly refresh that on Scott's behalf. So you can actually manage what's going on in key dates straight away. You no need to write it on the file, keep a spreadsheet and so on. Everything is there. Now, this calendar is historical as well. It's not just telling you what's going to happen over the next few days. As soon as you start using InfoTrack within LEAP, that calendar is an automatic log of what's happened or what's going to happen within the week, what happened within the month, what happened within the year as well. So this is actually logging everything since you've started using InfoTrack in there. And you can just recap and just show what the key dates were. So there's your evidence straight away, basically. So that key dates calendar is a really good way to meet CQS requirements. Over to the left, we have a number of dashboards. So as you know, you can actually submit AP1s through us. So I'll come back onto this dashboard later, the AP1 dashboard. But again, this is firm-wide, so it's not just relating to this particular matter. So whenever you see these little tokens over to the left, it just means that there's something that needs your attention. And again, if anybody's on holiday, I can access this dashboard and do things on my colleague's behalf as well, which is quite good to not miss a requisition deadline and so on. Top of the screen, we've got all of our products and services. So just let me show you where some of these things that will help you with CQS requirements live. So first of all, we have onboarding. So when you onboard a client, of course, we've got anti-money laundering options here. So you can order your full anti-money laundering searches through us, which are monitored, trackable and traceable. And there's a dashboard over to the left-hand side to support that. But you can fully digitally onboard your client as well. So with verification of online identity, you can actually send a request to your client or your potential client to verify themselves online by taking a selfie of themselves and a physical photograph of their passport or their driving license. And of course, you can use our onboarding service to run your AML check as well. So single click AML just speeds up the process in onboarding your client. Tracy mentioned a lot about source of funds as well, bank account details, bank statements, and so on and so forth. You can request the verification of funds from your client at point of onboarding as well. So this uses a source of funds. It's if your client uses online banking, they can provide all of their statements for you or via digital onboarding with us. So our ECOS solution is there for you to meet. And the beauty about this is that you can actually onboard your client fully. So if you want to attach your client care letter, your terms and conditions and so on, you can upload your documents. We use digital signatures through DocuSign on here. You can get everything signed. And of course, the most important bit of collating that information once you get it back is that everything will be dropping straight into the LEAP matter. So no worries about receiving emails, dragging and dropping documents into case. It will automatically do that for you via InfoTrack. So that covers off anti-money laundering, source of funds, and so on. Of course, you can search with us as well. So all conveyancing searches. Searching is very much a commodity nowadays. So your local, your drainage, whether it's official, whether it's personal or regulated, and all your environmental searches and so on can be sought by us as well. And we have full integration with Land Registry. So we do everything that the Land Registry does, but we've also built in some nice features as well. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight here is keeping lenders updated. So built into our Land Registry integration basically is the ability to file all OS1s or OS2s, your priority searches. Once you've actually ordered them through us, they will actually drop into LEAP straight away. And if it's relating to an LMS case as well, you can actually link the priority search to your LMS case just by literally clicking the LMS case number that you want it to assign to. So that will automatically update your LMS system straight away for you as well without having you having to do anything. So it just basically lessens the emails that come through and fine notifications and so on as well. So the integration we have with the Land Registry is full, and we've also recently built contract of sale as well. So of course, the beauty about integration with LEAP is that everything that you populate into your LEAP matter travels through to InfoTrack as well. So you will find that when you are ordering searches, when you are ordering documentation and so on, you will see that all of the fields, the relevant fields, are automatically populated from case. And so therefore the contract of sale takes seconds to actually pull through. And with a contract of sale as well, of course, you can get the EPC, you can get all the TA forms that are needed for this particular one. And that is almost built for you just by dragging through all the information from case management. Once you've got the documentation, of course, that will fall back into case as well. So productivity then, so if we look at productivity, we have property report. I mentioned earlier that naturally by using us for conveyancing searches, we build the property report for you. And it's dynamic. So we just basically extract all the searches that you've actually ordered through InfoTrack and digitally pre-populate the report, property report for you here. And of course, the tenure dictates what type of clauses are put into there as well. So for instance, if you order the lease through us for a leasehold property, of course, we will extract the relevant information from the lease and the documentation to support your report on title, your property report, basically. So you will always know that you can trust InfoTrack to include the right clauses. So all of the information that's needed to meet CQS requirements will be automatically added for you as well. And the beauty about any property as well, you can actually build the property report to your requirements. So you can actually ensure that certain clauses are not popped in. You can choose cash purchase and so on and so forth. But property report is particularly good for reporting on title for leasehold properties, and for all properties really can be done in 15 minutes. So if you're not yet using the property report, I do recommend that you do take a look at it. And of course, speak to your AM or your account manager, and they will give you a guided tour through it as well. Now, Lender Handbook lives here. So if I click on Lender Handbook, it will show me literally the Lender Handbook in full. So I can search for updates using the tabs at the top, and you can manage your alerts as well. So as I mentioned earlier, you can actually select the lenders that you wish to require alerts from, update them at any time, and that just means that you will instantly be notified when things change with that particular lender. Okay, again, searching for updates is very easy to do. and the handbook itself can be searched in all parts as well, part 1 through to 3, all available through InfoTrack. And those documents that get reported back to you as well when there are changes, they store as a PDF document and will store straight into LEAP for you as well. So again, providing the evidence that you are checking the lender handbook regularly on each matter. So they are there. Now, post-completion, SDLT and AP1. So just a quick one on SDLT. For those people who use InfoTrack, you'll be very used to this already, but compiling an SDLT submission through InfoTrack takes less than 2 minutes because of the pre-population that we offer. The information that's stored on the LEAP matter in case itself and all the documentation you've ordered through us will ensure that the SDLT form is probably 90% complete. All you have to do is check the tax calculation. So you will see here that the calculation is built for you. If you need to alter the calculation at all, for example, will the purchase of this residential property result in owning 2 or more properties, you will see that the calculation will change accordingly. So it is all there for you. Now, the beauty about this is that when you actually submit to HMRC through InfoTrack, of course, the Form 5 comes back, that drops into case for you automatically. But the beauty about it is that the land transaction return form will always remain within case as well. There's no time limit on there at all. It will actually allow you to look at the land transaction return form at any time within the case, and that recording of the calculation that you've done is recorded here. So it's automatically placed within the land transaction return form, which is stored as a PDF within Matter, and there's your evidence to meet CQS requirements. And similarly with the AP1, digital AP1s, we've been doing them now for 7 years. You can actually compile, submit to HMRC your AP1s. You can put together a straightforward residential AP1 within less than 2 minutes, knowing that everything is correct. Once you do submit it to Land Registry, you will find that your AP1 dashboard becomes a godsend. You will see there that the AP1 dashboard, once I've submitted, will give me a full history of what's happened with all AP1s. So if I can see that there's a requisition outstanding here, one's cancelled, one's completed, and so on and so forth, if I look at any particular AP1, and remember, anybody within the firm can do this, if there is a requisition outstanding, anybody within the firm can respond to that, and it will give you a full audit trail of everything that's happened with that AP1. Now, if you wanted to reply to a requisition, everything is visible to you on one screen, so you can see what the requisition is, and you can actually see that you've got a couple of action buttons at the bottom, which is respond to requisition. So you can do this, respond, upload documents to support your reply if you wish. If you just want to apply for an extension date and so on, you can actually request the action from here. Now, everything that you do when speaking to the Land Registry by this method is not just going into an inbox somewhere waiting for somebody at Land Registry to pick up. This information is going directly to the operator. So there's no need to spend hours on the phone trying to get through to the operator who's raised the requisition and so on. This will do it digitally for you, and every response, every requisition is going to be documented on the AP1 dashboard, but also within your LEAP case as well. So if I just go back to LEAP, for example, so this is my LEAP matter, everything will be documented very logically in here for you to provide your evidence. And that really brings me through the whistle-top tour, really, of what we've been looking at within InfoTrack and supporting CQS. Now, I've just actually got from the Law Society, and they're quite happy for me to use it. And it talks about where there is no requirement of storing evidence and procedures and plans and policies digitally or in electric format, it is definitely encouraged, because it just allows ease in curating and supervising and sharing that information. Once it's stored digitally, everybody's using the same platform, the same case management system. It's very easy to do as you say as you do, and document your evidence as well. It's all there under one roof. And that's me. So sorry for running over here, but just to remind you, InfoTrack, if you're not using it already, get in touch. It's all under one roof, firm-wide account, and it will help you with CQS. And I'm Lisa Edwards, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Sorry it's run over a little bit. So back over to marketing.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for that insightful presentation, and Tracy as well. We have about 2 questions come in from the audience. One is for Tracy from Haley. The CQS updated training is released around December each year. We have a renewal in February. Do the team need to have completed the revised course before the renewal application is submitted to CQS, or do they have 6 months from the re-accreditation to complete the updates?
So the simple answer is they have 6 months to complete the courses from the date of reaccreditation, and that still stands at the moment. If, however, that changes as part of the new, the new portal application process, then the Law Society will notify practices. But as it stands at the moment, it is 6 months from your reaccreditation. So, so they've got 6 months to do that.
Okay, thank you for answering that one. And the next one is for you, Lisa. This one is, will InfoTrack be adding the Building Society Handbook?
I'll check out for you on that one, actually. I think it's in there, so I will find out for you and get back to you. I'll respond to the group as well, so I'm not too sure.
Okay, and then we have one last one that's just slipped in. This one is from an anonymous attendee. When will the CQS portal launch?
It's due imminently. So, information from the Law Society is due imminently. So, it is looking like it will be the first half of the year. So just make sure that you keep an eye out for emails going to the SRO, which will set out when that's happening and how it happens.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much to Tracy and Lisa for joining us today. As I said earlier, this webinar is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the on-demand recording tomorrow so that you can review it in your own time. Thank you again for joining us. If you do have any questions, as Lisa mentioned, her details are on the screen, so please do feel free to reach out to her for any questions that you might have, or to your account manager. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and hope you have a wonderful day.